Everyone. Welcome to the Oversharing podcast. My name is James Pham. I am the founder of Opsin. We safeguard enterprises from data exposure using GenAI tools such as Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, OpenAI Enterprise, and all these GenAI tools. I have with me here today Stephen Clark, um, very structured, well-known information security expert. So, Stephen, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. Team, my name is Stephen Clark. I'm currently the Director of Information Security for a large healthcare organization. I've been in the industry for about 25 years, focused heavily on cybersecurity, GRC, data governance, and data privacy. I'm really excited, James, about our podcast today, and I would say extending, our knowledge and experience around Copilot and the various, products and services that organizations have to use to get prepared for AI readiness. And again, thank you for the time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited and I've been looking forward to this conversation with you because you are at one of the largest healthcare providers there. And definitely you have a lot of experience with kind of like, okay, how do I enable the organization to adopt Gen AI safely and securely? And I think the way that you say it is that create AI power organization with governance. Is that what you how you say it?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to whether you're utilizing NVIDIA, large language models, GPUs, things like Llama, Chat GPT, it could be Claude AI, it could even be the Google Workspace capability around Gemini, and of course,
Mm,
Microsoft Copilot. The use of those technologies must follow a highly structured, I would say, getting ready phase, utilizing onboarding and engagement types of communications with your organization, ensuring that you're following, GRC rules and conditions and
mm,
regulatory best practices for your organization. Because what you'll find is users are very creative in their use
mm,
of prompting based AI. They're looking to
mm,
actually solve problems and not just, for example, go to the prompting engine and utilize it as a Google search engine.
mm,
Today, I see a lot of users today attempting to automate tasks. They're looking
mm,
to summarize large amounts of data. But the challenge
mm,
with that is, are you exposing your organization
mm.
by accident in exposing your data, which may be restricted, it could be sensitive, it could be public or internal, but
Mm,
these AI prompting engines would have visibility into that data, and thereby require organizations to say, hey, how do we effectively allow
mm.
our users to utilize these prompting engines, and what tools do we
Yeah,
need to contain and corral those activities? So lots definitely to talk about today.
that's amazing. And I really like the framework that you showed me the other day, how you kind of go to different phases. Perhaps, if you could share with the audience like what that look like and how they should think about it. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people just like, okay, I wanna, kind of wing it, but you on the other hand, like very structured approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing, James, is that we don't have to boil the ocean from
Mm,
a data privacy, data security, GRC perspective.
mm,
The good news is that regardless of which AI stack you're utilizing, it could be Grok 4, it could be Claude AI, it could be Gemini, it could be Copilot. I will
mm,
say for the most part, the approach you take is one and the same. So let's
mm,
first kind of start talking about um, the work phases or work streams or swim
mm,
lanes that you have to tackle not only for your end user base, but also with your IT department, privacy department, data
mm,
regulatory governance, and maybe even legal team. And that's the piece that you have to really be aware of is that there can be legal implications if you
mm,
do not follow a regimented plan for the deployment of, for example, Microsoft Copilot. And so
mm.
happy to jump into those nuances here today.
Yeah, definitely. It's like there are four steps that you have here: get ready, onboard, engage, leave impact, extend, and optimize. So perhaps you could, kind of like dive deeper in each of these phase, and then,
Yep.
explain to the audience like how can they kind of replicate the success that you guys have.
Yeah, absolutely. So to set the precedent and sort of where I'm going with this conversation, when
Mm,
organizations get started with AI, the biggest, I would say, mistake that most organizations make is what are we going to do with AI? Okay. Usually, a lot of teams will say, let's start small and let's see what questions, Q&A, type capabilities that a prompting engine, sorry, may have inside
Mm,
their four walls. For example, legal teams have become very good at utilizing AI prompting engines, things like Copilot, ChatGPT, Grok 4. There's even highly specialized AI for litigators. And
mm,
so the reason I'm driving that conversation in that way is number one, you want to make sure what is the intent in the assignment of the AI engine that you're utilizing. So if you
mm,
pick, for example, Microsoft Copilot for work or
mm,
Microsoft Copilot for the web, each one of those Copilot capabilities or Copilot agents has a use case. So you want to,
mm,
number one, in the getting ready phase, define success criteria. How will you
mm,
measure success? And then how do you measure the return of investment in terms of
mm,
outcomes for that prompting engine?
mm,
Now, that's on the business end. So that's what I refer to as user enablement. How can we make the lives of our users and consumers better and
mm,
drive useful use cases and then determine the value of that time that's been reclaimed from the use of that AI prompting capability?
mm,
Now, as that's moving forward, we kind of also run in parallel what I call the technical readiness work stream. And this is
mm,
where the IT departments and the privacy teams have to ask the question, if we allow for Stephen to utilize a prompting engine and
mm,
he's simply trying to summarize data, is
mm,
that data that he's consuming, should it be allowed to be consumed by that prompting engine? What
mm,
risks do we have, right? So this is where IT departments have to say, do we have data governance? Do we have automated data classification? Can we determine what Stephen's doing with that data, as an example? Um, and in this phase, IT departments, technical services departments, cybersecurity teams really need to be focused on building an implementation plan around data governance, data awareness, and data usage. And otherwise, the use cases on the business end may end up becoming a failure at the end of the day, because now you've determined, well, if we do tackle specific use cases, we're putting our data at risk. Well, the good news
mm,
is that you can still accomplish the use cases that you're trying to tackle in the terms of scenarios or personas that you're trying to
mm.
tackle, but you can still protect that data and allow for those users to consume the data, but without exposing it publicly. And again, we can kind of get into the nuances of AI prompting engines where you have a free tiered edition versus a paid for edition of
Yeah.
those prompting engines. Things like Gemini, there's a free tiered edition and there's a paid for edition. Things like, do I have a BAA for the paid for edition of Gemini, right?
Mm,
Do I have a M365 Copilot license whereby I can utilize things like Purview to protect my data and measure and quantify how my users are consuming that data? But that getting ready phase really needs to be the starting point prior to even going online or
mm.
allocating those tools to your users.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Could you talk a little bit more about the responsibilities of ITs with security and what kind of like timeline are you looking at here for the first
Yeah,
phase?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So let's say hypothetically that the decision has been made that Microsoft 365 Copilot will be the predominant prompting engine to get started with. Just as an example,
Mm,
I see organizations starting with Google Workspaces and Gemini as well, but it's about the
mm,
same. Number one, you need to be able to quantify and measure the types of data you have. So, for example, you could choose Varonis, you could choose Microsoft Purview, and there's other tools out there, but you first want to quantify what types of unstructured data you have. Most users are very good about taking, for example, data extracts out of heavy iron applications like Infor, Epic, JD Edwards. There's a lot of other MRP, ERP solutions out there, for example.
mm,
But the key is if your users have access to data extracts, or if they have the capability to summarize data, for example, you want to get ahead of that issue. And the issue is that if you have users, for example, in the onboarding and engagement phase, which you can see here on my screen, if they
mm.
start to consume data with these free tiered editions of a prompting engine, the issue
Okay.
is, yeah, there's no BAAs or MSAs or usually NDAs that you have in place with those solutions. Now,
Mm.
if you're using a paid for edition, and you do in fact understand where your structured data is at, and you have that data classified, which by the way, Varonis and or Microsoft 365 and there's other tools can take care of that for you. But if you have your data classified and auto labeled, well, out of the gate, you can put security controls into place to say who's utilizing PHI, who's
Mm.
utilizing PII. Do we have, for example, in the banking financial industry vertical, are we violating GLBA general controls for the use of our depositor information coming from our core banking platform? So
Mm.
as you onboard and engage your users, you have to solve that problem first. You need to know what data they're consuming, the frequency and the use of the data, how they're sharing the data. And then once you have that, you can then actually onboard and engage your users and say, hey, if you consume this data, here's the experience you'll have. That
Mm.
way, you're not violating general controls, you're not violating employee privacy, you're not violating your customers' privacy in regards to the use of their data, and
Mm.
your users won't feel held back because you can put in controls to ensure that they utilize that data responsibly in the onboarding and engagement phase, but they're not violating any company policies or GRC rules that you may be concerned with.
That makes sense. You talk about, get a understanding of what type of information that you have, right? You talk about like having Varonis, Microsoft Purview, and all these tools you have with. And the feedback that we heard from a lot of organization is that that type exercise is gonna take a while. And I've seen organization that said like, okay, it's gonna take like months for me to implement Purview, for example, and it take a long time, right? And and it's not just about scanning. And then after that, there's this whole realm of data governance, data labeling that they need to do. Right? Like they're gonna use some kind of automatic labeling, but there's also a lot of like manual labeling that happen. So
Right.
talk a little bit more on like the timeline of these things and how organization can move fast on it, because like you could be on the side and thinking about all of this stuff, waiting for it, and it would take like a year or two before I'm
Mhm.
ready. But by that time, like you lost all that productivity. So like a little, talk about a little bit
Absolutely.
more on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about timelines, for the implementation of things like automated data classification. So, James, to go back in time, if we went back to 2015, just as an
Mm.
example, it took a lot of time. And why was it so difficult? Well, first, most organizations, until about 2015, were highly reliant on on-premise file shares, SMB
Mm.
file shares, NFS, NTFS. Some organizations even had very large NAS appliances. You know, they may have had hundreds of terabytes or even petabytes of data. Those legacy technologies did not really adequately support um, from an easy button perspective, classifying your data and putting labels on the data. SMB file systems just didn't have that capability, and usually organizations had agents sitting on desktops and laptops that would interpret the data to the best of their ability based upon sensitive information types, auto label it, classify it, but at the end of the day, it was still not quite there. Now, once organizations began to move towards cloud-based storage repos, it could have been Microsoft Azure, AWS 3 buckets, it could have been Microsoft 365, enterprise box accounts that do an effective job of replacing SMB file shares. Those tools allowed for you to take advantage of native capabilities for
Mm.
audit, regulatory governance, automated data classification, so forth. Now, fast track to today. If you have Microsoft Purview, you can literally turn on automated data classification and utilize Microsoft pre-built templates and Microsoft pre-built sensitive information types to
Mm.
auto-classify your data, but not negatively impact the user experience. So,
Mm.
James, a good example would be a team of APAR financial team members. Let's just pick on finance. So they're
Mm.
dealing with everything from payroll to benefits information to auto payment of obligations on the financial side for their organization. So they have access to
Mm.
account information. Well, the Microsoft stack, whether it's an email, a document, a Teams chat, a PowerPoint file, an Excel file that may contain all employee routing information for payroll, Microsoft Purview can automatically classify that data.
Mm,
Those sensitive information types have already been built. So by
mm,
simply turning it on, your data gets automatically classified. Now, I want to be clear that automated data classification is not 100% perfect. Okay.
mm,
But the key is you can get 90 to 95% there within a time frame of, I would say, 60 to 90 days. I've had a lot of success personally in driving this for large organizations. So you first have to turn the tool on and then quantify what types of data you have. Now, once
mm,
you've gone through that exercise, you can then, for example, if we move to the third phase of the deployment of Microsoft 365 Copilot as an example, you can actually provide feedback in the form of quantification of the type of data you have. You can use
mm,
Purview dashboards, Microsoft Copilot dashboards to say, here's the type of data that the finance team is consuming with Copilot. Okay. The best part about automated data classification is it's not static. You can, in
mm,
fact, change your data's classification by refining your sensitive information types. And this
mm,
is where I would say it does take a little bit more time. You know, it can take up to a year or two to get to that point where you're 99.9% certain that you're auto classifying your data perfectly, right? That it is really spit and polish. But if you're talking
mm,
about saying, can we get 90% there very quickly? The answer is yes. And I would say right out of the gate, before an organization adopts a prompting engine, whether it's Copilot, Gemini, Grok 4, whatever, and you're going to consume your data, use a
mm,
tool like Purview or Varonis to automatically classify the data. It's already been refined across most industry verticals, so you'll get, maybe 90% there for the unstructured data repositories, things like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and so forth. And that
mm,
way, you at least have a really good idea of how to quantify and measure the use of your data with your prompting engine of choice. And again, I'm just picking on Copilot. But that's very, very
mm,
important. So probably less than 90 days, most organizations
mm,
could get this up and running very quickly.
mm. Microsoft would definitely endorse this podcast. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
and Varun too. So we talk about onboard and engage, the timeline, how long it takes. So let's move on to the next phase, which is deliver impact. So could you talk a little bit more there? And I really like the framework that you have, very structured. I love it.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Going back to where do most organizations fail in the use of AI? Again, I just want to make that statement again. If you do not have a good understanding by persona of what you're looking to accomplish, for example, you need to have a good idea of how AI benefits HR, finance, accounting, payroll, IT, supply chain management, legal, your executive team, and so forth. And even your partners that you work with may share an identity with your ecosystem and thereby be able to consume your AI engine of choice. But you need to make sure that you understand what problems you're looking to solve.
Mm,
Now, if you do that, the get ready phase, as you go to the phase that I call deliver impact, you're going to be able to quantify and measure what is AI doing well, what is AI not doing well. Did we do a good job of training our users in how to adequately prompt these AI engines? Can we measure and quantify the level of adoption of Microsoft Copilot, right? So if you say we have 10,000 users and 10,000 Copilot licenses, you want to be able to quantify by department and by persona the rate of adoption of Copilot.
mm,
Because, James, let's face it, AI is not going away. We need AI to tackle those mundane, manual based tasks so that way users may focus in on the more important activities of their
mm,
job. So you need to be able to identify that and quantify that and say, for example, not only are we more productive and we're leveraging AI prompting in the right way, but we can report upon the success of how accurate those prompting scenarios are doing. So if Stephen says, as a very simple example, summarize all emails in the month of May of 2025.
mm,
Okay. That's an example of a very simple prompt,
mm,
right? or find all files in SharePoint that contain the social security number, right, in my HR SharePoint site. Maybe HR needs to do a review of all content that contains social security numbers. Well, guess what, James? Copilot will do that for you. But you have to be able to prompt it in a way that makes sense. And so being able to measure the success of those prompts, are your users happy with that prompting capability? And then if additional training is required, well, from that measurement, you can say our users are doing the following things well, but not doing the other activities that they're tackling with AI. It's not that much of a success. So that way you can identify successes, identify failures, and then I would say amplify your focus on training for those areas that may require additional iterations and refinement to basically make sure that your users utilize that prompting engine in an effective way. And so that deliver impact phase is very important because you want to quantify what you're doing and you want to make sure that what you are doing overall with the use of AI is actually working.
I love it. I really love it. Um,
Yeah.
and you kind of like talk about like prompting it correctly, and the example that you gave was, find all the social security numbers. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that prompt can be helpful, it can be malicious, you know.
Can be. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So, unfortunately, human beings are not perfect. And so, from a cybersecurity perspective or data governance perspective, you have to be worried about three things. Number one, um, you will have good human beings that want to do a wonderful job for the organization. They want to be creative, they want to be efficient, and they want to create value for their employee or for their colleagues. They want to produce value for their customer base, just really good people. But you also have to protect them from making bad decisions with the use of AI. So a good example of that would be once you've classified your data, for example, with Varonis or the Microsoft stack, and I'll pick on Microsoft Purview. If you automatically classify your data, you can put in policy actions to prevent, for example, James and Stephen from accidentally consuming data that they shouldn't have access to. A good example of this would be, James, let's say you and I were cloud engineers, and our primary goal was establishing rules for what can traverse our network. Okay. You and I would never have the need to consume with Copilot payroll data. Well, the great thing about Purview is that if you've classified your data, you can put a policy action on that and thereby prevent Stephen from prompting Copilot and saying, summarize this file that contains payroll data. It would simply pop up a
Mm,
box and say, Stephen, you're not allowed to consume that data. Now, that would be, for example, and maybe a way to illustrate Stephen's being a good human being. He didn't even know he had access to that payroll data. It was just accidental.
mm,
Number two, what about the user that it's sort of a gray area? They've always had
mm,
access to the payroll data because they're a backup maybe to the payroll processor, but they really should not have access to that data. So you can put in what's called an insider risk management policy, an information barriers policy in Purview with the
mm,
use of automated data classification to say only those members of payroll or HR can prompt with Copilot files that contain payroll data. That would prevent those gray areas of access from actually occurring. Okay. And again, it's not that those individuals that fit into the gray area are doing anything malicious, but you're still trying to protect the employee from getting access to data that might prove to be sensitive if there's ever litigation or if their role should ever change. You don't necessarily want for that individual to have access to that data as well. So that's
mm,
part two. Part three of it is, and unfortunately, in every organization, there are circumstances where an individual or individuals may take advantage of a company. And of course, you and I've seen that, over the years where someone's taken data, they've posted it to the dark web, or they've attempted to sell data for personal benefit. With the use of Microsoft Purview, and again, with those policies I've described, if you classify your data appropriately and they
mm,
attempt to utilize that data with Copilot, you can get an alert to say, Stephen attempted to prompt Copilot with this file and we did block it, and he or she cannot consume that data with Copilot, but they attempted to issue a malicious base prompt, right?
Mm.
So James, this is where cybersecurity teams, data privacy teams really have to put a lot of thought into business operations processes and ensure that access to data from an access management perspective is hermetically sealed and taken care of prior to widely adopting any type of prompting based AI, including Copilot. And number two, to ensure that company policies or audit regulatory requirements do not put them in harm's way in regards to potential litigation. And then again, that kind of comes from the value prop of using the Microsoft stack because those capabilities are already built into that ecosystem with Microsoft Purview.
No, you actually sound very knowledgeable about the Microsoft Stack and Purview, insider threats, and data labeling and classification. So um, maybe I think let's talk a bit more on that front, right? Like um,
So
the yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead, James. Yeah, please.
Yeah, um, so those are like a really good side of Microsoft Purview, right? Like
Mhm.
they're definitely good. And what else have you seen when it comes to the other side of Microsoft Purview?
Right. So every tool, every cloud platform has weaknesses, right? And just being transparent, there's not a silver bullet for all industry verticals, whether you're utilizing Microsoft 365, Google Workspaces.
Mm,
Um, Most organizations are hybrid, meaning they pick the right tool for the problem. Okay. A good example would be, and
mm,
again, I'm just pointing out a gap that I see in a few industry verticals with the Microsoft 365 stack, and that is easy visibility into what users are prompting for. It's not that you can't do it, but there's not a perfect portal or perfect reporting mechanism to say, is Stephen, for example, prompting Copilot uh, for adult oriented urban dictionary concepts? Okay, I'm trying to be politically correct here, right?
Urban
So,
Dictionary concept.
well, that's a problem, right? I mean, so I'm being comical, but that is a real problem. Every organization, for example, if a user goes home and they're on Google search, whatever they do on their personally owned device, hey, that's their business. But when you're talking about responsible use on a company owned asset, yes, can you curtail irresponsible use of Copilot with Microsoft
Mm,
Purview and communications policies and compliance policies and Teams policies? The answer is yes. However, is there a perfect reporting mechanism in M365 that gives individuals like myself or engineers the ability to, from a UI perspective, to
mm,
have ease of use of that data? Well, there's ways around it. You can tie that data into Sentinel. You can develop your own Power BI dashboards, which I've done, but it's not perfect in regards to ease of use. It doesn't have that Apple-like app capability. Now, I believe that Microsoft at some point in time will probably elevate how they present data from a Copilot usage perspective for how users prompt Copilot. But at the end of the day, I think there's really some great third-party solutions out there that can be explored. But what it does do well is to give you the ability to classify your data, to automate it, to take action on inappropriate usage. But you're
mm,
still going to need a tool that tells your administrators, your executive team, and your cybersecurity team, how is Stephen Clark as a persona prompting Copilot day to day?
mm,
Is it admissible? Is it okay? Does it pose malicious intent? And what types of data is Stephen consuming as a persona with his prompts? And again,
mm.
it's sort of like a chicken and egg thing. Sometimes, some things Microsoft Purview does really great, and there's some things that do need refinement. But that's been my experience. And again, not beating up Microsoft at all. There's not a silver bullet for every use case. I
Yeah.
can find problems with Varonis. I can find problems with Symantec DLP. I mean, there's a lot of great solutions out there, but you really need to make sure that you have visibility into how your users are prompting your AI solutions. Again, it could be Grok 4, Cloud AI, Gemini, Copilot, whatever, but you really need that in place.
That makes sense. It's not like from what you're saying is that it could be done. It's just that you have to navigate different
Right,
places to get that
correct.
done, right? Like you talk about the team's policy, about insider threat, about classification. It's not like there are multiple places that you have to kind of juggle to get what you need, basically. And you said that it's not like an Apple-like experience where it's like so
Right,
easy and
exactly.
simple, intuitive to use.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we talked in depth about the deliver impact portion with probably like a good time to go to the last phase of the adoption, which is extend and optimize.
Correct. Now, this is the exciting part of the journey. Once you get past the getting ready phase, the IT department has developed policies and controls. Once you've gone through onboarding and training, and then once you've completed the third phase to deliver impact, which means that you've quantified the success and the failures of your rollout of prompting based AI engines, things like Copilot, you can then get into the spit and polish aspect of utilizing AI inside of your four walls. Now, what that means, James, at the end of the day is that you're developing your own Copilot agents. As an example, you are cross blending and developing prompting capabilities which are templatized. Okay, so for example, Copilot, you have the capability of utilizing Copilot Studio. You can build your own agents. You can integrate those agents into the Microsoft Power Platform. Things that usually developers had to do prior to the emergence of Copilot. Well, today users can be basically citizen developers, but with point, click, and shoot technologies to drive workflows, for example, in the Power Apps platform ecosystem. So a good example would be, a very simple example would be, I was just asked recently, we need to replace SurveyMonkey with a solution whereby we can integrate it into M365. Well, guess
Mm,
what? It does not require a developer, James. And the other value prop of Copilot, as an example, is that you can blend that in into those predefined drag and drop workflow capabilities and
mm,
utilize Copilot agents to do some of the heavy lifting for that work. Okay. So lots of neat ways to develop your own plugins, your own connectors, your own agents. But to get there, you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish. It could be something as simple as we would like a Copilot agent that can interface into ServiceNow. Now, that's a cool capability, but guess what? ServiceNow stores data. And what does that mean? You need the ability to contain and corral what data goes into ServiceNow. Because what if you don't have automated data classification turned on and Stephen could upload any data into ServiceNow that he or she wanted, right? Well, now Copilot can not only see the data on the desktop, but now Copilot can see the data in ServiceNow. And that's why understanding what you're going to do with Copilot, automated data classification, if that's in place, will prevent the unfortunate and high likelihood of data exposure in my example within ServiceNow. But if I were to prompt Copilot to say, hey, go out and find XYZ in ServiceNow, or what is the status of my ticket in ServiceNow, and you give it the ticket number, you would want
mm,
to make sure that those agents are designed and are bound by your automated data classification rules to protect the data from the user, to protect the data from the agent. Again, whether it be malicious intent or accidental access, but again, that's where that extend and optimize phase comes in. Is you're really to that point where you're doing semi quasi development and you're exploring the more advanced feature sets of specific agent driven usage of AI, meaning you may have an agent for legal, you may have an agent
mm,
for HR, you may have an agent for cybersecurity teams, things like, hey, write me this KQL query out of Sentinel. That's a real agent. That's something you can do today with Copilot. Really cool hip things, but that will usually come later because those are very refined capabilities that you don't see until you have actually accomplished those three other phases that we've described. Otherwise, you'll kind of find yourself in a GRC general controls violation scenario, and then you're having to rip and replace everything you've done, and that can be very painful. So, definitely would encourage anyone that's looking to utilize Copilot heavily to make sure that they follow those first three phases first. and get their house in order from a data classification, adoption, usage, and persona-driven access perspective. So that way you can get to those really cool hip things that Microsoft Copilot has to offer.
Yeah, and you kind of talk about, GRC violation zone. What are the consequences of that, actually?
Absolutely. And James, you hit the nail on the head. So if you're publicly traded, or even if you're a private equity organization, okay, and I'll give you a good example. Let's say that you're a private equity organization that is handling credit card authorizations. There's a lot of good companies out there that are not publicly traded. They are, in fact, processing credit card authorizations. And let's say hypothetically that there's a team who does a daily extract of the day's business, and they have access to that data with Copilot. Well, if you accidentally expose your consumers' transactions, either from an internet perspective, on the dark web, or someone should plug in a USB thumb drive and take that data home with them, and maliciously or not, that data gets exposed, you will be subjected to fines. And oftentimes I'll call what happens publicly the wall of shame. So
Mhm.
unless you have a
See.
tool that tracks and reports upon how Copilot is being utilized, and if you don't quantify and measure that, and you don't know what types of data are being consumed, you could find yourself in a very precarious litigation based circumstance. Number two, your consumers or your customers will not trust you with their data. There's no such thing as consumer loyalty anymore. They want to know that there's some assurance or degree of data privacy, which we're all concerned with. And then part three is, at the end of the day, organizations need paper policies in place as well as employee training and technology levers, right? Tools to contain and corral the use of Copilot in a responsible way without hindering innovation, but be able to report upon how is Stephen Clark thinking when
Mm.
when he's utilizing Copilot? What are his prompts? Are there elements of his prompting that need investigation? And
Mm.
and that's something I would say that Microsoft is still kind of figuring out. There, again, James, going back to there's not a silver bullet. The one weakness that I see is that users need, or administrators and cloud engineers need the ability in a very easily understood format and portal to say, what is Stephen Clark thinking, and how is he prompting in a very easily understood format, and what types of data is he prompting for, and how's he processing that data via prompt. So that's very critically important. And otherwise, you'll end up on the wall of shame. You could face litigation. You can face
Understand.
fines, particularly if you're publicly traded. That's just the state of the world we live in. Consumers want to know that they're protected at the end of the day.
That makes sense. I think we're about to hit the time limit here.
Yeah.
Maybe I really like this framework that you have there, Stephen. So if you have to pick one most important lesson that the audience can take from this, what would that be?
Absolutely. So number one, most important lesson that I've learned kind of going through this exercise and through this journey is do not attempt to push out Copilot without first understanding what you want for Copilot to do for the organization. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're just providing a tool without any boundaries, without any guidelines, without any controls, number one. Number two, if you do have a tool that you're utilizing that's third party that measures and quantifies and provides visibility into how prompts are being constructed, you won't know how to measure success. And then once you do get into that third and fourth phase, it's almost impossible to go back in time and say, hey,
Mhm.
HR or finance, you can't do this anymore. So users will be as creative as they can with the tools you provide them, but you do need to contain and corral how those tools are utilized. Otherwise, it will just get out of control from the very beginning.
Mm. Zikura. All right. Thank you so much for taking time to talk
Yeah,
on the podcast. And
yeah,
listeners, during the podcast, feel free to continue to put your comments in the chat. We will answer it even after the podcast. So appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to the podcast, and appreciate Stephen, spend an hour with us to talk about, GenAI adoption, Microsoft 365 Copilot, and I really like the framework that you have there with the 4 step. That's amazing. That's the most structures I've seen out there. So truly appreciate your time there.
Yeah, James, it's always a pleasure. Love working with your team and having these conversations.